What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind? The frost cracked under Leo's boots, a sound like tiny bones breaking. Each step was an effort, a negotiation with the cold and the weight in his chest. The air was a blade, sharp and clean, scented with pine and the distant frozen promise of snow. But here, in the long shadow of the empty stable, the smell was different. It was older. It was hay turned to dust, leather gone soft with age, and the faint sweet rotten scent of apples forgotten in a feed bucket. It was the smell of a life paused, of a story interrupted. He pushed the heavy door, its groan a protest. In the silent, late afternoon gloom, the wind caught it for a second, whistling through the gap, stirring the dust motes into frantic, golden dances in the slivers of light. The stalls were empty, cavernous and dark, all but one. She stood at the very back, a shape of shadow and deep, burnished red, like a bloodstain on the fading light. This was Elara, his brother's horse. The warm-blood mare was a statue, her head low, her breathing so slow it seemed she was barely alive. She didn't startle at his entrance. She just was, a monument to absence. Leo hadn't wanted to come. For 6 months, since the accident on the Marsh, since the fog had swallowed Mark and never given him back, this place had been a wound he avoided, but the bills for her keep kept arriving. A quiet, persistent echo of a responsibility he never asked for. Selling her felt like a final, unforgivable betrayal. Ignoring her felt worse. So he came, every Sunday, to do a duty that tasted like ash. He moved slowly down the aisle, his own breath pluming in the cold. He was a hunter by trade, a man who knew how to be still, how to read the subtle language of the wild. But this silence, the one in this barn, was a language he didn't understand. It was heavy with a grief that mirrored his own. He stopped a few feet from her stall, not entering. This was their ritual. He would stand. She would ignore him. He would dump fresh grain into her trough, fill her water, and leave, the knot in. His stomach pulled a little tighter. She was taller up close, all power and elegant, long lines. Her coat, a rich bay, was dull, lacking the shine a cared-for horse should have. Her mane was a tangled mess of dark threads, but it was her eyes that held him. They were not the soft, doe-like eyes of storybook horses. They were dark, deep pools, and they looked through him. At something far away in the past, or in the misty fields of some memory only she could see, she was here. And yet she was profoundly elsewhere, a ghost in her own right. Today, he didn't move to the grain bin. He just stood, leaning against the opposite stall door, his arms crossed. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft sigh of her breath. "He's not coming back, you know," he said, his voice rough, unused. The words hung in the air, cruel and final. He hadn't meant to say them aloud. It was what he thought every time he saw her, this shared, painful truth between them. Her ear twitched, just a faint, almost imperceptible flicker. It was the first reaction he'd ever gotten from her. It wasn't much, but in the absolute stillness, it was a seismic event. He uncrossed his arms. His heart was a dull, heavy drum in his chest. He took one step into her stall. The straw rustled under his feet. She didn't move away. She just watched him, those ancient eyes unblinking. He remembered. Mark talking about her. "She's clever, Leo, too clever. She knows things." He'd said it with a laugh, a proud gleam in his eye. Leo had dismissed it as his little brother's romantic nonsense. Slowly, so slowly, it felt like time itself had thickened. He raised his hand, not to touch her, just to let her see it, let her smell it. His knuckles were chapped from the cold. A working man's hands, so different from Mark's gentle artist's fingers. She lowered her head a fraction, her nostrils flared, taking in his scent. He held his breath, He could see the fine veins under her skin, the soft whiskers around. Her muzzle. She exhaled, a warm, hay-scented cloud that misted over his frozen fingers. It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was an acknowledgement. For the first time, she was seeing him, not the ghost of his brother, not the intruder, him. He didn't reach out to pet her. That felt like too much, a violation of this fragile, new space between them. Instead, he did what felt instinctive. He let his hand fall, his fingers brushing against the worn sleeve of his own jacket, and he simply stood there, sharing the silence, sharing the cold, sharing the loss, and for a long moment, they just were, two creatures anchored in their separate sorrow. In the same quiet stable, the light was failing now, the golden dust motes gone, replaced by deep blue shadows. His time was up. The drive back to his empty house awaited. The ritual was complete, yet it felt different, unfinished. He took a step, back, then another, preparing to turn and walk away, to leave her to the darkness she seemed to prefer. His boot scuffed the stone threshold of the stall, and that's when he heard it. The soft, unmistakable sound of a hoof shifting in the straw. He froze, half-turned. He didn't look back. He didn't dare. He just listened to the quiet rustle, the gentle footfall. She was following him. The following Sundays were no longer a duty. They were a pilgrimage. Leo found himself arriving earlier. Leaving later, the silence in the barn was no longer heavy. It was a shared language. He would talk to her, his voice low, telling her about his day, about the woods, about the stubbornness of the old truck he drove. He never talked about Mark. That name was still a stone in his throat. Ilara began to greet him with a soft nicker, a sound that was less a hello and more a sigh of recognition. She'd let him brush the tangles from her mane, her eyes half closed in contentment, but there were moments, flickers of something else. He'd be describing a patch of bog rosemary he'd seen on the edge of the marsh, and her ears would pin back sharply, a tremor running along her flank. Or he'd whistle an old tune his brother used to hum, and her head would snap up, her gaze sharp and focused, looking past him. Through the walls of the stable, toward the distant, mist-shrouded fen, it was as if she were listening for an echo only she could hear. Leo tried to ignore it. He told himself it was just a horse being a horse, skittish, unpredictable. But the hunter in him, the one who tracked patterns and read signs, couldn't let it go. Her unease was specific. It was a map pointing to a place he'd been avoiding for 6 months. The breaking point came on a day, thick with a low, clinging fog, the kind that had swallowed his brother. It rolled in from the marsh, muffling the world in white. Inside the barn, the air felt charged, tense. Ilara was restless, pacing her stall. Her hooves soft on the straw. She wouldn't settle. She'd stop and stare at the closed door, her body rigid, listening to a world she could no longer see. Leo sat on an overturned bucket, watching her. "It's just weather, girl," he murmured, but the words felt hollow. He reached into his pocket for a knife, intending to idly whittle a piece of scrap wood to calm his own nerves. As he pulled it out, a small, worn object tumbled out with it and clattered onto the stone floor. It was a brass compass, Mark's compass. The glass was cracked, the needle trembled, but it was his. Leo had found it in the pocket of an old jacket. He'd borrowed from his brother and never returned. He'd kept it, a secret, painful talisman. The sound of it hitting the stone was small, but in the tense silence, it was a gunshot. Ilara froze. Her pacing stopped. She turned her head, and her eyes locked onto the compass at Leo's feet. A sound escaped her, a low, guttural noise that was nothing like her usual soft nicker. It was a deep, resonant whicker, filled with an urgency that was almost human. She took a step toward him, then another, her fear of the fog forgotten. She nudged his knee with her nose, not gently, but insistently, her focus entirely on the compass. She blew out a hard breath, fogging the cracked glass, and then she looked. At him, it wasn't the look of a confused animal. It was a look of profound knowing. It was a plea. In that moment, the careful wall Leo had built around his grief shattered. It didn't crumble. It exploded. The image of his brother, laughing, checking this same compass before heading out into the marsh, flooded him. The phone call, the search parties, the empty, hopeless silence that followed, a sob wrenched itself from his chest, a raw, broken sound he didn't recognize as his own. He crumpled forward, his face in his hands, the compass clutched so tightly in his fist, the metal dug into his palm. The tears were hot and endless, a storm of 6 months of held-back agony. He cried. For his brother. He cried for the unfairness of it all. He cried for the lonely Sundays and the empty house and the weight of a grief he thought he had to carry alone. He was lost in it, adrift in a pain so complete he forgot where he was. And then he felt her. She didn't nuzzle him. She didn't whinny. She simply moved closer. She lowered her massive head and rested her jaw on the crown of his bowed head, her breath stirring his hair. The weight was solid, real, an anchor in his storm. She stood there, immovable, her warmth seeping into him. She held him there, in the quiet barn, as he wept, her own silent vigil a testament to a shared love, a shared loss. She stayed until his shaking subsided, until the tears ran dry, until there was nothing left but a hollow, aching calm. Weeks later, the first true thaw came. The world dripped and sang with the sound of melting snow. Leo led Ilara from her stall. She was different now. The dullness was gone from her coat, replaced by a healthy gleam. Her eyes were present, aware. He didn't put a saddle on her. He just looped a rope around her neck, a gesture of trust, not control. He led her not to the paddock, but to the edge of the property, where the land began to slope down into the vast awakening marsh. He stopped, looking out over the reeds and the channels of dark, reflective water. "He's out there somewhere," he said softly. Ilara stood beside him, her shoulder touching his. She was calm, her ears pricked forward, watching a hawk circle high above. Then, she did something strange. She nudged him, not back toward the stable, but forward, toward a narrow, almost invisible path that led into the reeds. She took a step onto it, then looked back at him, waiting. A prickle went down his spine. "She's clever, Leo. Too clever. She knows things." He followed. She led the way, her steps sure and quiet on. The soggy ground. She seemed to know the path by heart, choosing firm ground where it looked like there was only water, avoiding the soft, sucking mud that could trap a man. She was no longer a ghost. She was a guide. She walked with a purpose he couldn't understand, but a purpose he trusted completely. She brought him to a small, dry island crowned with a single gnarled willow tree. At its base, partly sheltered by the roots, was a simple stack of stones, a cairn. Not made by nature, it was too deliberate. His breath caught. He knelt. There, tucked under the central stone, was a small, waterproof tin, bleached by the sun. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside wasn't a map or a clue. It was a photograph, Mark. His arm thrown around Ilara's neck, his face pressed against her cheek, both of them grinning wildly, and a note, written in his brother's quick, looping scrawl. "If you're reading this, you found my spot. Don't be sad. What a ride, eh? Look after her and Leo. Let her look after you, too." He looked up at Ilara. She was watching him, her dark eyes deep and knowing. She dipped her head and blew softly on the photograph, just as she had on the compass. He hadn't been taking care of a forgotten relic of his brother. He had been found by a living, breathing compass, a creature who knew the way through the deepest fog, not because of any magical sense, but because she carried the map of a lost love in her very soul. She had been waiting for him to be ready to follow. She had led him here, not to a body, but to a final, whispered message, a permission slip to stop grieving and start living. He stood, the photo held to his heart, and rested his forehead against her strong, warm neck. He wasn't lost anymore. The ghost mare of the marsh had brought him all the way home. Sometimes, the ones who carry you out of the darkness are the ones who were waiting in the silence all along. If this story found its way into your heart, if you felt that quiet ache of loss and that soaring hope of being found, then you belong here with us. Do us the immense kindness. Press that subscribe button and leave a comment below with just one word that describes how you're feeling. Your words become part of our story, and tap that bell icon so you'll be here for the next journey. Next heart that needs mending. We see you. We're so glad you're here.